Hey class. All right, so this is the second to last of the major lectures. This one's pretty short in comparison, but this one gets through a lot of the stuff that brings us directly up to the present and things that I need you to be very aware of while we're doing the last little part and the last bit of the paper idea for the final one, which is like pretty much what you think is an intervention into what is the current history of digital media in comparison to the way we derived from it through the idea of the imaginary about this cultural utopia of digital media to its corporatized data collecting version of it. So that's what today we're going to basically talk about. It's going to bring you pretty much to the present. The final one is futurism, when we'll talk about robots, which is a terrifying lecture, but you'll get there. So I'm at my house in Jersey. That's where this is my bedroom from when I was a kid, except it was made into a guest room just after I left for college. So that's cool. Whatever. Anyway, all right, so here's some things to get up to date on. So you watch the movie The Social Network, and that's pretty much the story of how Mark Zuckerberg invents Facebook and this huge usable tool of connecting people to one another. But one of the most important factors inside of Facebook is the idea that privacy is what is commodified, what is turned into something of a shareable device. And what's important about that is to realize that social media itself is a communications tool. And as a communications tool, it's not just a facilitator for the way we communicate via phone or mail or letters or whatever. It is actually a way of collecting data as well, user data. And if you go to any of the sites, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, you notice that there is no actual or very little content made specifically by the company itself. It's made by user data. That's what makes those companies work. So it really is an equivalent of just a phone switchboard, but in data archived form. So it's there. Now here's what's really interesting about this. That in the history of digital media, up until about 2001, 2002, and the advent of YouTube and Facebook, hardware development used to be these big objects, these big machines that kept getting better and better at being smaller and faster, which they're still doing. But at a certain point, we reached the end point of Moore's Law. And a lot of people think that the real end point of Moore's Law was about the time of the iPod Nano, that's what it was, that it sort of came out to be about this big. And what was interesting about the iPod Nano is that it really could not become smaller than that, because that's when we realized there's a certain point where usability becomes unusable at a certain smallness. So then the prioritized version of what Moore's Law really set to configure was really this approach to what to do with data development. And it turns out that it becomes servers or hard drives. A server is a hard drive. And so now the data development is server speed and object speed and satellite speed and Wi-Fi speed, but it's really the same objects now. It's no longer this huge universal development of all these new products, but one type of product that keeps getting advanced over and over again. Now these servers go into some place called the cloud. You've probably heard that term before, the cloud. And that's a really cute name because the cloud, when you hear the term the cloud, is actually referring to the internet. And the internet itself isn't in a cloud. It isn't in the air at all. It's actually in huge, huge holes all over the earth. Mostly in the Arctic Circle or around places where there are no fault lines, but that's where their servers are. That's where all the data of all the internet are kept. And it's called the cloud because it's supposed to be everywhere and all at once, but really it's also a cute marketing moniker. This way you don't think too much about the fact we're literally digging the earth to create these huge cathedral-sized storage facilities that keep everybody's data with redundancy, which means that if one of them were to die, it would find a way of resolving itself in another place because that's how well these are connected. And this data that's kept on these things is really all of the processing data and all the archive of all the social media and the processing ability of it all. And that's where things got a little weird. Because as social media developed, we had some really good interventions to what social media can do. Social media as a communications facilitator really advances the way globalization works. So you were able to see how revolutions were able to occur. So you could see the Occupy movement that began in Tahrir Square during the Arab Spring, and then eventually moved all the way to the United States for the Occupy Wall Street movement. These devices, these communications platforms, were used to connect one another and people together so they knew where the movements were moving, to watch each other, and literally in the Arab Spring, overthrow their governments. It was a way of showing that data itself, the way of communicating via these new communication devices, social media devices, you could literally control the way that people populate information. And that's phenomenal. Now, on the other hand, all of that becomes quantized. And what that means is it becomes just a database, a huge database where people can then find out what you're doing with it. And while that seems sort of innocent or unconnected to anything that has to do with anything, in 2013 we found out something pretty disturbing. We found out that since 2007, the US government, the NSA, along with what they call the Five Eyes, which is Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and England, get together to basically retrieve all of this metadata and track everybody all the time. And that paranoia of the 90s, where there's trackable and people would be digitized, started becoming something that was actually a reality, that it's very likely that you were being tracked at any moment. Because in the 90s, there was this paranoia of tracking and this worry that we'd be discovered wherever we go. But they realized that carrying GPS devices or being tagged was something that wasn't really doable. You couldn't do that to people and expect them to get away with it. But now, if you make your GPS tracking device purchasable, all of a sudden it's not that bad and you wear it all the time. Everywhere you go, you are being tracked by your GPS. You are being tracked by what type of data you send and everything. It's called metadata. So metadata is data about data, and it's being collected at all times. So here's a really short video by AJ Plus that gets to tell you about what the NSA leaks were about.